We are a salmon people. The Indigenous peoples of Canada see themselves as part of nature. For them, salmon is a valuable resource and an important part of their identity, spirituality, and way of life. This deep bond is reflected through how they treat salmon, with respect. The salmon people trust that the fish will return every year, just as they know the sun will rise every morning. Everything and everyone is part of this living, natural cycle. They are part of the natural world.
Axnam wow. Slodanim ara in sepent im achs. Slora hal ni gera, chad ni golo walam tim achs. Disnoom.
In 1867, the newborn country of Canada established the Indian Act. The Indian Act governed the lands and natural resources on which Indigenous peoples lived. It was meant to integrate Indigenous peoples into the mainstream society and control their actions. This law cleansed Indigenous peoples of their dignity and culture and led to the colonization of knowledge. The engine of colonization was fueled by the forced enrollment of Indigenous children into Western boarding schools. The practice killed the Indian in the child and taught them the colonial ways of knowing and being. In boarding schools, Indigenous peoples were classified as one homogeneous group. Their cultures and languages were stripped from them, and they were forced to adopt Western ways of knowing and being. This included being forced to speak only English and to see the world through a Western perspective.
My grandparents went to residential school. They didn't end up teaching my parents' generation the language or a lot of these oral traditions, and so it's one of those things that is for many of us a bit lost of a tradition.
Language shapes culture, and with culture comes a specific viewpoint of relating to the world. For Indigenous peoples, this was lost.
I lost my talk. The talk you took away when I was a little girl at Shubinakadi school. You snatched it away. I speak like you. I think like you. I create like you. The scrambled ballad about my word. Two ways I talk, both ways I say. Your way is more powerful. So, gently, I offer my hand and ask. Let me find my talk so I can teach you about me.
When your mother tongue is stripped from you, you lose your way of knowing and being. This leads to the colonization of science. However, this was not only about language. In practice, the government denied the salmon people from using their traditional ways of fishing. For example, they harvest fish inland near the end of the salmon's life cycles. They know exactly which population the salmon come from because they catch them near their hatching grounds. This connection to nature is ingrained in their ways of knowing and being. When the land and waters were transferred out of their hands, indigenous knowledge was devalued while Western fishing methods were promoted. Instead of cooperating with nature, Western people made nature work for them. The switch from traditional to Western fishing practices had many negative effects, such as the spread of disease and increased environmental pollution.
So I think farm fishing has a number of environmental issues associated with it. These pens, first of all, are not permanent structures. You have basically pens that have breaches. The nets can be broken and they have to be constantly monitored for holes. It's a very unnatural type of enclosure where fish are maintained in a very small area, very, very high fish densities. And as a result, the waste from that really destroys the ocean floor and can affect, cause water pollution in the region of the farms.
After centuries of oppression, the Canadian government is taking responsibility for its actions and wrongdoings.
For Indigenous peoples in Canada, the experience was mostly one of humiliation, neglect, and abuse.
However, today the question for Canada is how to fix its relationships with its Indigenous peoples. The Canadian government is trying to give voice back to previously silenced communities.
In short, we've been working hard in partnership with other orders of government and with Indigenous leaders in Canada to correct past injustices and to bring about a better quality of life for Indigenous peoples in Canada.
So, is it possible for Canada to fulfill its promise of correcting past injustices and bringing a better quality of life?
If instead it means that there is a sort of symmetrical conversation between, let's say, hydrologists or people or engineers and Indigenous people of Canada, and both learn, and in the process not just the Indigenous people learn something, but also the engineers and the hydrologists learn something, and the outcome is a new knowledge, then it would be decolonizing knowledge, I think.
In line with these ideas, through the inclusion of Indigenous fishing methods, the Canadian government is not only undoing the wrongs done to the communities, but also creating a shared knowledge.
Back in the tons of residential schools, and even shortly after, nobody was willing to share, some of those techniques and methods. And now, some of these things could, help save our planet, right? Because we have that original traditional knowledge. Those are now things that we can share, not only with our own communities, but with other people.
We're taking in new technology like the Ditson and implementing it into our traditional fishery.
Our community-owned fishery is working for us.